Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Connect. My name's Thomas Hunt, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Kasper Ernest, who is Director General at GIRP, the European Healthcare Distribution Association. Kasper, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Very well, very well. It's great to have you on. Just as a first sort of introduction, I think it'd be great if you could give us an intro into your career so far, really, and who you are, and then obviously your current role at GIRP.
Yes. So my name is Kasper Ernest. I have been in Brussels, so the capital of the EU, for the last 17 years doing lobbying. Basically, I have represented many different sectors. First, from a national perspective as Director of EU and International Affairs for the Danish Confederation of Enterprise. And over the last 7 years, I've been working exclusively in pharmaceuticals. First in an association representing smaller wholesalers who are making pharmaceuticals available cross-border, affordable medicines Europe, learning all the finer details of the pharmaceutical sector. And then now, since a bit more than a year, I've been the Director General for GIRP, which represents the large full-line wholesalers in Europe.
Right, okay. Who are GIRP? I mean, you pronounce it, I pronounce it GIRP, you're saying GIRP. Sorry, it's obviously
No worries.
a translation thing there. But who are you as a group, and what is it you do day to day?
Yeah. So our members are basically the people who deliver all the medicines that you would get in a pharmacy on a daily basis, or in some countries as well from hospitals. So what we do is we bring medicines from around 3,500 different manufacturers across the whole European continent to all patients as well across the continent. We deliver every day 62 million packs of medicines. Over a year, that gets to 15 billion packs. So basically, we're that invisible link that gets the medicines from the right warehouse, from the right manufacturer to the right pharmacy when you need it, where you need it, and at any time you need it. So it's quite a big operation, and it's a bit more than just moving a pack, because in Europe, we actually have anything from 10 to 110,000 different products in a market. So having all those products ready at any time to be delivered anywhere within, let's say, 2-3 business hours, that's quite a big operation to run. So that's what our members are doing. And we represent those companies across 33 European countries, as well as some of the largest companies that are directly members.
How do you represent them? What's your role in that
Well,
association?
our key role is to sort of translate from those businesses. They're businesses, right? They have to make things run. They do their daily operations. They have to show their owners, whether it's family owners, whether it's cooperatives, so owned by pharmacies, or whether it's shareholders. They have to provide results for them. And my job is to translate that reality to the politicians who are making the framework conditions across Europe for the sector. So that's what I call a lobbyist. My job is really to make sure that the reality out there is being understood by the policymakers when they make new policy. So a lot of that is providing basic data. How many deliveries do we do? What's the delivery time? What's more or less the cost of that? What does it mean when we want to move to, for example, a zero emission vehicle fleet for corporations? That's a goal I think many people can share. But when you speak about pharmaceutical delivery, for example, we need cars that can handle cool chains. So we need cars that can actually air condition while at the same time manage the full delivery routes. So that can be 500-600 kilometers in a route. And these kind of things, unfortunately, still don't add up. So my job is to really go from the companies where we have all those facts and explain what are the routes, how do we handle, what is the air condition needs, and then explain to politicians, this is where we are. And if you don't sort of foresee that in your regulation, we will unfortunately not be able to deliver in the same way as we do today, because there simply are no vehicles in the market that can handle that. So
Yeah.
that will have to follow the development. So it can be anything, but my job is really trying to translate what's the reality. So again, saying in this case, for example, we will need to see more research and development within the car manufacturing industry and batteries before it will actually work for the medicines distribution. So it's just to give you one example of the kind of thing that our job is really to translate that reality to And vice versa. Sometimes politicians have objectives. They want to see certain things happen. And from time to time, business has to deliver on that, whatever it is. And we, of course, also have to then go back to our members and say, this is now a task that we have to figure out. How do we solve that? So
Yeah.
it's a two-way street in that sense.
So you're serving wholesale distributors, obviously, of medicines, and are you also serving hospitals and pharmacies and manufacturers, or is that a different group? Do you get involved at that level as well, or not so much?
We collaborate quite a bit, especially with the pharmacies, because that's where our members, so the full line wholesalers, are primarily for doing their business. That's what they're there for, is to serve them. And we have a lot of common interests. We have a common interest in making sure that the joint infrastructures, so both the distribution infrastructure, but also all those pharmacies we have around Europe, are being maintained, that we invest in them, that we use them to the best possible extent. We are really their life core. We supply each of them typically 2-3 times a day. So that's an example that we work very closely with them. But yes, we also have manufacturers we work closely with. We discuss what are the needs of manufacturers, what our needs are. Again, an example, scope 3 emissions. We all have to report on scope 3 emissions, but how do we measure it? So
Hmm.
we sat together with manufacturers and develop common principles for reporting on scope 3 emissions so that we are getting the same. Again, from our side, we collect medicines from 3,500 manufacturers. So if they're all reporting to us in different ways, it becomes impossible to deal with that. So that's just again to give you an example that we certainly also work with the upstream supply chain.
I know you've been in the role reasonably recently, but extremely experienced in the sector. In the announcement of your appointment, there was a sort of hint around a new vision, more use of digital data. So I was quite interested to hear what actually your vision was for the association and what that all meant in reality.
Yeah, I think the reality has been that our members, the full line wholesalers, have been in a stagnating market in the sense that we've seen more and more players entering. And there's an expectation that we are delivering certain public services, meaning we are delivering medicines at a loss. There are certain medicines, there's no economic case for delivering that. You
Right.
need to get a €2 medicine to the last island in Greece. That's just not profitable for anyone.
Mhm.
And so we're delivering a lot of services while others who come into the market are just focusing on a very specific segment where everyone can earn money with the
Mhm.
way the compensation models are set up from the public sector. And there we're saying, okay, there's something skewed here. So we are adjusting how we speak about that. But GIRP as an association also, of course, needed to improve. We needed to get better. Typically, when our members are doing a really good job, they're invisible, right? You see the pharmacy, you see the pack, so you know the manufacturer, but how it got from point A to B, that's not something you see. And therefore, we often say when we do our job the best, we're invisible. Now, in politics, being invisible is not the best starting point, right? That's a reality. GIRP as an association, as that bridge between our members and the policymakers, we had to become more visible than we have been in the past. We have to be more clear. We have to have better data, all kinds of things that you work with as a to put it bluntly, a professional lobbyist, that had to improve. So it was a new vision for the association and how the association can deliver results for our members. And we've delivered a new strategy now that we're now implementing, and we are looking at the general framework conditions for the sector and whether we can actually try and approach it in a different way. We can come back to that in the future. So that's really around it. So it's also a lot about public affairs because that's what we're doing first and foremost, right? So it's how do we communicate better who we are? How do we do better influencing on all those stakeholders we have to influence? And how do we keep the proximity to our members? Because if we're not close to the members, we are not the best, let's say, bridge between what I continuously call the reality and then the policymakers. So that's the three key bones, and that's very important. And digital is important in all of that, both in how we work, but also in terms of new developments in AI. We have to, as a small association, we don't have the kind of resources that the pharmaceutical sector has, the producers, the manufacturers. So we have to be very smart and adaptive in for example, AI in our work on a
Mhm.
daily basis.
Yeah. And what's one of the most surprising things you've learned in the first few months talking to members? What sort of struck a chord with you?
I think that But the most surprising is actually the extent to which it is not recognized, even by members themselves sometimes, that they're actually delivering public services. So
Mm.
if you go to a sector like postal, we kind of know instinctively that there's one postal operator that has this specific universal service obligation that everyone must be able to get a letter if it's necessary. And one company as a minimum has therefore an obligation to deliver the whole country, no matter, within a certain period and stuff. And that the public sector, that the state is paying something for that, right? And in medicines, it turns out that with distribution, we actually have public service obligations, but we are remunerated or compensated in the exact same way as those who are not having those obligations. That was really surprising to me,
Mm.
that in all other sectors, there's a clear, conscious connection between the public money and then the public objective, which is in this case the servicing of access everywhere at any time. So that was quite a surprise that was so disconnected, and that even our members, it's so ingrained with them that they're just doing this. They're like, yeah, but we cannot not deliver. There are people out there who need their medicine, that they weren't actually really communicating a lot about those products where they're making a loss, which is what you define as a public service. When you're doing something as a business that is a loss making because it's a public good, that's a public service. And that was quite surprising that when I've worked with other sectors, because I've worked with postal before, I've worked with energy before, those kind of obligations and the connection between compensation and obligation is very clear. Uh, yeah, really surprising actually.
Right. And why do you think that's become the incumbent? Why is that set in that current framework?
Well, I think to some extent things have developed, right? So in the past, there would be primarily the full line wholesalers. That was the main entrance. That's what manufacturers would use. Manufacturers were not really pursuing direct to pharmacy, the means of communication. If you just go back 20 years, the means of communication were quite different, right? So you couldn't just communicate on email or whatever you wanted. So they couldn't do direct to pharmacy, or smaller wholesalers couldn't get the same access. But with the digital developments and internet and blah, 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 of course, it became much easier to do your sales channels in another way. So we've just seen a lot of different business models enter the market over the past 2 decades. And at the same time, there's been no conscious change in the general compensation models. And to be honest, that has been partially our own sector's fault. So that's why I'm also talking about a new vision and changing things. Is we have to scroll back a little bit and say, okay, what's the fundamental challenge here? It's not just that manufacturers choose to go somewhere else, so because that's what's going to happen. You cannot prevent the development. And I don't think anyone wanted that. That was never the point. But at the same time, we instinctively knew that, well, if we're lost, you lose something more than just us. You lose something that you can't replace. Or if you need to replace it, it's going to be much more expensive. So honestly, I think it hasn't really been conscious. There has just been a business development. Our members have followed. They have also branched out in new services. They're delivering more and more services around it. The problem is just that competition is fierce. That's good, always good for the payer, right? But branching out and doing other services just no longer pays the bill at the end of the day for all those packs we're delivering that is making a loss. It just doesn't. So now we're really at a situation where we're so financially strained that we see significant problems with some members. And at the same time, huge concentration has happened over the past 20 years. So you're down to, in the vast majority of member states, you're down to 2 to 5 wholesalers, full line wholesalers. You even look in big countries, Germany, France, de facto, you're down to 5 large full line wholesalers on a national level.
What was it previously? What's it come from?
It's gone down from, if you really go back 2-3 decades, you're down from 50, 60, 70, lots and lots. Italy still has a larger share. So in Italy, for example, we would say there's around 20 still, but that's consolidating, right?
Mhm.
We've seen American companies coming in, trying to enter Europe. They went into a number of countries and they actually left again and were selling off their assets in Europe. And in some countries, they haven't even been able to sell because there's already only two, and they're all already owned by someone who is with a market share that is so high that you can't take over the third one. So we're really now at a concentration point where we say, if you want to still have competition, healthy competition between the players in the market, and you want these public services at the most economically efficient way, you're going to have to start making conscious public policy choices. So yeah, that's a very interesting challenge we have ahead of us in the coming years.
Yeah, for sure. And if you think about a full service distributor, which is what you're obviously describing, what do they do? What can they do that a manufacturer can't do easy themselves alone, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I mean, for the individual delivery, let's be honest, that's not the point. The point here is that we collect products from around 3,500 manufacturers. So when a pharmacy puts an order with us, in each order, on average, there are products from 19 different manufacturers. Now, just imagine that a pharmacy would have to order with all those manufacturers. The number of invoices, the number of totes you would have to get, the number of deliveries. So you would literally have a line of delivery trucks outside every pharmacy continuously all the time. And that's what I think people underestimate. And that's at the same time, that warehousing function we have, the stocks we have, some products are sold 20, 30 packs every day, each pharmacy, and other products are sold one product every 2 weeks. So the fact that we have that stock at any given time is very important because you never know when that patient is walking in. And pharmacies, they don't have huge stocks. You can't stockpile 100 and so thousand different pack sizes in a pharmacy. So therefore, it's a totally essential task. There's no one, and I think neither pharmacies nor manufacturers are kidding themselves around that. The issue is that there are certain products that are fairly what you would call blockbuster products, right? And where it's quite high volume, the price is quite interesting. The law is typically made that everyone is getting a certain percentage of the price to do the distribution. So if you just take that product and you just distribute that to the pharmacies, that in itself can make a very big economic difference on that one product. But of course, that was also the product where we were making money and cross-subsidizing other parts of our supply and other products that are making a loss when you distribute it. As I mentioned, the €2 pack before, going to the furthest outer region of a given country. And so therefore, you cannot replace our function as such. There's no way pharmacies could deal with it. There's no way it would lead to massive shortages in the sense that you wouldn't have what you needed, where you needed, at the time you needed. It's just, it's unthinkable. But for all those very, very interesting products, lucrative products, as I tend to call them, it's not because they're super high priced, because that's not very interesting to distribute as well. I will probably come back to that when we get to the cold chain part. But those products, if you just remove those, then our equation simply doesn't add up anymore. So that's the challenge that we have to talk about collectively in our healthcare system.
Yeah, for sure. And I presume also pharmacies are getting a line of credit on their purchases with the distributor as well. So, I mean,
We pre-finance at least 170 billion euros every year.
that is huge. Like, for a small pharmacy chain, there's no way you can finance this up front. You need credit terms, don't you, to run your business?
And I mean, more and more pharmacies prefer to have almost no stock. So that's also why there's quite a lot of competition that we deliver 2-3 times a day to each pharmacy. And if you have 2 wholesalers you're using, some pharmacies are delivered 4 to 6 times a day. Depending on country, depending are you urban or rural area, but you are as a minimum supplied every day, even in the most remote areas.
Yeah.
So it's that's a very crucial role. That's also why we speak a lot to pharmacies. And they're also financially a bit stressed in most countries, or very stressed, to be honest.
Yeah. It's not actually a very good situation you're describing. Yeah, because you're describing a situation where the distributor's under pressure on their margins, the pharmacy's under pressure on their margins, and there's very few of them left, but they're playing a really critical role in every country's ecosystem around this area. So it's
They're also labeled as critical entities by the EU legislation and national legislation. So it's in that sense, it's understood. I think this equilibrium that has been created that hasn't been conscious, and it's not. We have a role now to communicate that much better because
yeah.
things have to change.
Okay, yeah, for sure. You hinted there just around sort of cold chain and temperature control. If we dive into that topic for a bit, what's the most common way temperature control fails in this sector? What have you seen, and where are the issues?
I think I mean, in general, I think it's fairly well known that it happens in handover, right? When the product shifts hands, and then of course it is more difficult in transport, slightly more difficult to maintain perfect temperature stability. As long as it's in our warehouses, I would say no matter almost where in the supply chain, it's usually very stable. So that's some of the pain points. But it's getting better and it's getting much more accurate. Yeah. So
And on those handoff points, because I agree with you, that's always going to be the weakest area in most cold chain networks. Oh, you mentioned it's been improved. How has it been improved? What are the ways that you've seen to improve in that handoff process?
I think just the way that we, first and foremost, I mean, there's always development in the actual infrastructure, the way the trucks are connected to the warehouse physically. I mean, that has changed. And secondly, of course, the way we transport it in terms of the packaging, the totes, whatever it's in at the moment it's arriving. Okay, it's more pallets, but depending on the product and the volume of the product, that differs. So I would say everything around it, the packaging, but also the offloading areas in the warehouses and so on, and unloading as well. And there is actually quite a lot ongoing. It's very clear when I arrive in a new warehouse how different that specific area looks to some of the older warehouses. That's very clear.
Yeah. In the newer warehouses, is there less reliance on packaging in that process versus an older warehouse when you're more likely to have a time out in the sun effectively, or a longer handover where packaging becomes the only way of controlling the temperature? Is that what you've seen, or is it still quite reliant on packaging?
Frankly speaking, I don't think necessarily that you adjust as a example as a manufacturer. You don't necessarily adjust your shipment based on which warehouse it's arriving at. So that would be a wrong assumption. So it will be the same packaging that is. I mean, by and large, it's working, right? So let's be clear. It's not that you have temperatures excursions that goes above the limits every day. So by and large, that's working. But of course, in warehouses with a slightly older infrastructure in terms of the handoff points, you will be much more aware of your handling, of your timing, the docking and stuff like this. So I'm sure that's, of course, you adjust to the sensitivity, because by and large, we cannot afford to have those excursions
Yeah.
on outside.
What do you think that sort of the cold chain temperature control corridors will look like in your world in sort of 2 or 3 years' time? Do you think are there infrastructure changes coming that are going to make it a big impact, or do you think we'll look quite sort of fairly similar to where we are today?
I think compared to the kind of how it looks today, investment, I mean, when we go to the more new built warehouses and then 5-10 years, I think that's going to look fairly similar because it is so efficient now. Will also probably always be some incremental improvements, but I don't see I also don't see a huge need for improvement. I mean, by now we don't see excursions that are problematic in handoffs in those situations between our delivery and our warehouse facility. I think if you go upstream, products that are traveling intercontinental, we don't have anything to do with that. That's not us handling that. So there, of course, you have handoff points that are probably more problematic still. You have more actors who are not primarily and devoted only to pharmaceutical. So probably there is still a lot of learning to do there. I've visited this year. There's more and more specialization in that as well. So I think there it's more about specialization, about building your knowledge and competence, building the specific warehouse capacity you need for that. But that's further upstream. I mean, the members I represent in GIRP is as soon as the manufacturer has placed their product on a market, they will deliver that to us somehow. And that's our handoff point to the warehouse. So for our members specifically, we don't have that huge problems as I think, not huge, but we don't have as many problems as I think you have further upstream in the supply chain when it comes to distribution.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the further upstream you go, it's very focused on things like reverse logistics,
Yeah.
rental, getting the packaging back into the supply chain. Obviously, it's just so it's continued being used or repurposed, and maybe that's happening in this area as well. I actually don't know. I don't know if you do, if you've seen this with the packaging that's been provided or not.
There are some developments. I would say the individual packaging of some of the products is and the difference in standards and stuff also of the measurement equipment, that's a bit challenging.
Mhm.
Big challenge I hear there for sure, especially when it comes to equipment. So individual pack measurement equipment, temperature and humidity, whatever it be. There we would like to see some form of standardization probably over the coming years, because every time we have to handle that when it has to be interoperable, preferably with our IT systems, if we want further transparency on temperature excursions, we have to be able to show the authorities the full travel. We're going to have systems that are talking together. And the more different devices, the more expensive everything is in terms of returns, in terms of reverse. So there are challenges that are definitely occurring. Those won't be less as we see more and more cold chain
No,
products.
no, absolutely. And I think that obviously the industry is growing and more medicines need temperature control than ever before. So that's just putting stress on the overall supply chain anyway. So yeah, interesting times. If we jump into quality then, I know you just mentioned that there briefly. Your new president, I read, talked about, I think, stricter quality expectations. The question really was, what does good enough look like and what isn't acceptable anymore, in your opinion?
I think you have to see that on the backdrop that one of the big projects in the coming year for GIRP is that the good distribution practice guidelines are actually going to be transposed into a delegated regulation of the EU.
Right.
So with the new pharmaceutical legislation, the GDP guidelines will no longer be guidelines. We may call it that, but legally speaking, they will now also officially be binding. I mean, de facto, we have had to follow them, of course, for the last more than a decade,
Mm.
but they will become a delegated regulation, and we will be working on that. And in that sense, we do feel that there are areas where inspections are heavily focused on, to be very blunt, our members, because we deliver most packs.
Mhm.
So how do you do your inspections? Well, the way you see risk today is to say, where are most packs going through? And thus, that's the highest risk of anything going wrong, so to say. And our view is probably a bit different, that when we see things are going wrong, it's with the less experienced, less qualified wholesalers. And we are also of the opinion that there are too many WDAs, that there are too many entities getting WDAs that shouldn't have it, that they just don't manage to fulfill the criteria. We still have a lot of countries where GDP inspection is very scarce. We're supposed to have the GDP certification every 3 years. That's not happening in a number of member states. Some member states are down to 4 GDP inspectors. It's not a very good situation. Italy still doesn't do GDP inspections at all. So there is, in that sense, room for improvement. And we see these differences between the larger and the smaller wholesalers. There are small wholesalers, of course, who have highest standards. That's not the issue.
Mm.
But we do see, and when we talk about quality, it's also contains for us the concept of falsifications and stuff like this. That there are challenges that needs to be addressed, and we need to be more strict in who is getting a WDA.
How do you solve, who polices a WDA and how do you solve that problem?
Well, the WDA is basically usually given on the backbone of a GDP certification. So it's the inspection authorities who issue or the medicines authorities who issue the WDA. And this is where we are not very comfortable that GDP inspection is not sufficient, considering the number of WDAs that are given. And that a lot of the inspections are then focused on the largest companies, because the risk thinking is then we've covered the largest part of the market, right? And we're like, yes, but that that's a question of how you approach risk and what's actually risk. Is volume the only risk if those who are doing it are the trusted, known, huge partners, or is it another thing, another way we have to approach it? So that's what we are seeing at the moment. And then at the same time, we see inspectors are relying on GMP when they're doing GDP inspections, right? Because we have no GDP annexes and stuff like this. So suddenly we see with validation and other issues, they start applying it to transport and things where the GMP context of how you should do things just doesn't fit in because it's not a controlled environment in the same thing. How, if even, do you do proper humidity control in transport? These kind of things. It's really, really, and that can be difficult discussion to have with inspectors. So on one hand, we have a lot of entities that are not inspected frequently enough, not inspected at all. And on the other hand, we see requirements going to extent that it doesn't provide any patient safety. It doesn't provide any further quality of the actual product in some of our inspections. And so there's that mismatch that we need to find the right balance as we make the new GDP regime.
Yeah, and will the new GDP regime solve this issue, do you think?
We hope so.
Right. What you've seen, has it got the ability and the framework to do that?
Well, the framework is a delegated regulation. So in that sense, yes, I mean, that's the regulation. And the question is, of course, what we're going to put in there. You could just take the current guidelines and just copy paste.
Mhm.
It's up to the legislator, or in this case, the European Commission, because it's delegated to them. That's why it's called the delegated regulation. It's up to them to decide how we're going to transpose this guideline into legislation now. That will be the inspectors working group, as we understand it, who are going to let's say do that work in practice on behalf of the commission. And that's a dialogue we're trying to have with them, of course. How do we want the GDP? This is a chance to really revise what it looks like. Do we want more FAQs only for GDP? Or do we need to be more explicit that you can't rely on GMP annexes? I think some inspectors are raising with me the concept of having GDP annexes instead of having to rely on the GMP. So we're really in the starting phase of this.
Mhm.
Legislation is not even officially adopted yet, but we know this is coming. And so we're really on the thinking part now, where everyone is saying, okay, let's take a step back and say, what would we like to have in the future? And then we'll see where the consensus ends. And also if the authorities are willing to actually change anything, or
Right.
if they're just going to do, let's say, more or less a copy paste of the current. But I hope there will be a willingness to find a way forward where we can actually provide patient safety and quality, perhaps even better patient safety and quality, but in a less cumbersome way, and less admin burden, and less unnecessary things that are not actually adding to those two goals.
Yeah, interesting. I know that we've had a few guests on talking about counterfeit medicines and that problem that isn't going away. So, I mean, this all fits in, doesn't it?
Yeah, GIRP is also part of the European Medicines Verification Organization. We're one of the founding partners, and so that's has nothing to do with the GDP specific, but it's another part of where we are active, and trying to see how do we make that system work better as we move along.
Yeah. Okay. I read that you push hard for standard carbon reporting across the supply chain. I was quite interested to understand why now specifically and what's changed.
Well, it started a few years ago, to be clear, and that was basically coming out of the newer requirements for reporting on scope 3 emissions. And as I said, scope 3 emissions are difficult to handle for every sector, any company. You rely on your suppliers, your customers, your clients, your stakeholders to provide information to you. And in our case, as I said, this means receiving information from more than 3,500 manufacturers on their emissions. And vice versa from their side, how we are actually reporting on our emissions to them, because our emission are their scope 3 emissions, and their emissions are our scope 3, right? So what we did was to say, yes, we agree that it would be really good if we could come to common principles on how to report. So how do we measure things? What means an emission in transport? What is emission in shipping? These kind of things. So it was actually a joint project between us and industry. It's true, we led it via what we call the European Healthcare Supply Chain Network. And yeah, it was just a positive project that everyone wanted, and it was out of this requirement to report on scope 3 emissions.
Right. Okay. And obviously, cold chain uses a massive amount of energy.
Yeah.
How do we sort of cut emissions without raising risks for medicines? What do you think will happen in the next couple of years on that area?
Well, I think as especially manufacturers are pushing, but of course also we are pushing towards achieving at the end of the day the zero emission target. That is still the binding target of the EU. So at some point we're going to have to get there as a sector. And the more we push for that, the more we're going to see innovation in packaging material. We work closely with some packaging companies when it comes to our sector or totes and stuff like this. And there is a lot of innovation going there. A lot, a lot. There are a lot of new materials, a lot of new chemical processes on how to actually create cooling in different ways when you're not connected to electricity or anything. So there's a lot of things going on, I would say, in that space. And this is something that is being asked for by our industry and where, of course, we're driving demand.
Yeah.
But it's not something as an association we're sort of directly involved with because that's also a competitive element. But it is quite interesting to follow. It also goes to even, let's say, not using plastics as much. So when we talk about sustainability more widely, I start seeing cold chain packaging made of organic material, these kind of things. So in the beginning, we were thinking very, I would say, monochromatic towards, okay, this is about cooling capacity in and of itself, what material of cooling capacity. But now that push to sustainability also goes towards organic, where in the beginning there might be some trade-offs with the actual cooling capacity. But in the long run, that is another aspect of actually getting to full sustainability. So it's a really interesting space and a lot is happening.
Yeah, yeah, and I think probably having the right stakeholders in the room who understand, isn't it? Because if you think about playing off, say, passive packaging and removing an element of the temperature-controlled transport from your supply chain, there's obviously big wins there. You're right, sustainable packaging, recyclable packaging is another option. Then you've got the whole solar area about how you power your plants or how you power your facilities, and then battery. You've got the battery element to the whole thing as
Oh,
well.
we're lucky. I mean, we have big warehouses, so we have a lot of roof space and these kind of things. These winds are already being harvested. Where we have issues is on our vehicles. We have electric vehicles to do, or most of our members have to do the urban routes, for example. But the second we get to rural areas, they just can't. The batteries can't deal with it. And it would so significantly impact our vehicle capacity that it just becomes totally financially unsustainable. We would need too many vehicles, too many drivers, stuff like this. So until we see improvements there, and we have to be honest, we're not big enough to drive the battery or car industry in that direction, but it's being driven by so many factors anyway and internal competition that it is improving. And I'm sure at some point there we're going to get to the point where we can also do it. And then we will always have specificities. You go to the most rural areas are also those with the most extreme weather. So you take Greek islands, that's where you get plus 50. That's where batteries starts having issues on range. Or you go to north of Sweden, which has the lowest population density and the coldest weather in the winter, where batteries are also struggling. So, I mean, just to say that there are areas where where we are far from having solutions. And then there are areas where we already have solutions. They're out there working already.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's an interesting area. I just think there's lots of things when the right people are in the room talking with bringing different things to the table that can offer a lot in this. Talking through these problems and seeing how they could solve it is interesting, isn't it? So hopefully we see some change as we go through the next couple of years. Obviously, we're running out of time a little bit here, so I mean it's been a brilliant conversation. But I wanted just to finish on your future outlook and really what was the one change you hope to see in sort of cold chain or temperature controlled logistics for wholesale distributors by 2030? What are the things that you're hoping you'll see?
I mean, first of all, 2030 is getting very close. So, but nonetheless, I mean, if I look a bit further, one of the things that could be really interesting is self-correcting cold chain systems, right? Where the systems with sensors, AI, and other logistic controls can really work together and automatically reroute and stuff like this, adjust their cooling even when under transit and stuff like this, or trigger interventions, call for intervention if necessary to do that. That would be quite interesting if we really can make those things work together and also the equipment, as I say, with better self adjustment and stuff like this. So self correcting cold chains would be a really interesting thing to try and achieve. But we might be talking 2040 and not 2030. I don't know.
Mm.
I'm not that much expert. I'm not out there on the front line with the innovators in the packaging sphere or equipment sphere.
Yeah.
But it will be quite interesting, right?
Yeah, it's great. I love it. Yeah, I think a self-driving car that could self-regulate would be a move, wouldn't it?
But it's not such a far. I mean, there's no doubt that I mean, if de facto our we have systems that do that in other areas of our comfort. So why not for medicines and why not for our cold chain? So I don't. It's not necessarily that far away. It's more the rollout and implementation, and of course, getting the cost structure right, so that it becomes really competitive. But as you say, it's a growing market. Some of those products are so expensive that it's actually worth making investment in it. So
Mhm.
I think we're going to see a lot, and maybe 2030 is too far. So
Yeah.
somewhere between. But yeah, I think that's definitely going to be the future containers and stuff. We're already. I mean, a lot of it is already on the way
Yeah.
or there. Yeah. It just needs to be better connected potentially.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Of
AI is really gonna. It is that will play a role, right?
course.
Because it can combine so many factors. It can predict weather, or it will know weather moving forward. So it will be able to do things that yet we are sort of in binary systems. You have the outside temperature, you have the inside, and then you can adjust according to that. But if with AI it knows what's going to be the temperature in an hour, in 2 hours, in 3 hours, what's the temperature along the transport route? Because
Mm.
again, it can really change dramatically. If you are in mountainous areas, the temperature when you go up, even you're driving 20 minutes, it changes 10, 15 degrees Celsius. So if with AI that would be predicted and stuff like that with altitude measurements and things, there is actually a lot of scope for improvement.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. I haven't thought about it actually, but you're right. The AI can, of course, you can read the weather, can't it? Effectively, it's just the internet, so it'll tell you what's coming down. 5 hours, it will tell you what the temperature will be, so that can adjust. So very interesting. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, look, we're out of time, so Casper, I really appreciate you coming on. It's a brilliant conversation. If people want to find you or find out more about what it is the association does, how can they do that?
Then they go to the impossible name GIRP.eu, so GIRP, GIRP.eu, or they send me an email on k.ernest, ERNEST, at GIRP.
Good man. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
So you'll be listening to Cold Chain Connect. My name's Thomas Hunt. Please tune in next week for our next episode. We look forward to welcoming you then. Thanks.